Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Definition, aka your friendly neighbourhood spoiler man, and this episode we're breaking down one of my favourite MCU movies, that is Spider-Man Homecoming. Watching the webhead wall crawl his way back over to Marvel in Civil War was one of the most exciting times to be an MCU maniac, and the character's first solo movie has a lot to unpack from it. Throughout this video we're going to be breaking down all of the insane details and Easter eggs that you only really notice after binge watching the rest of the Infinity Saga. This doesn't contain every single detail in the film, but there are a lot that I haven't seen mentioned on any of the lists, so make sure you stick around until the end. Obviously there will be heavy spoilers here, so if you haven't had a chance to check out the movie yet, then I highly recommend that you check out now. Make sure you subscribe to the channel for videos like this every day, and please drop a thumbs up if you enjoy the content. With that out of the way, thank you for clicking this. Now let's get into our breakdown of Homecoming. Okay, so the movie opens in the wake of the Battle of New York, with Adrian Toomes showing off his child's drawing of the Avengers. We later learn that this was made by Liz, and Adrian remarking on her talent is the first clue we get that the two are related. This scene pulls back to show a Stark Tower, with the A left is all that remains on the sign. This was shown at the end of the Avengers, and as we know, the location was later renamed to Avengers Tower. Toomes' crew are salvaging scraps from the Chitauri invasion in Central Station, and we actually see the Leviathan that Thor and the Hulk killed in Avengers as part of the main focal point of the area. We're introduced to Damage Control, which are actually a fictional construction company from the comics. The vendetta between Toomes and Stark is set up here, and we also get a subtle hint that they're opposites to one another. Toomes' theme that we can hear introduced in the background here is actually the same as the Avengers, but in minor tonality, which shows how he's a darker version of the hero. Adrian is really a blue-collar worker that felt screwed over by the 1%, and thus he took things into his own hands and rejected the idea that he should always be a second-class citizen that has no control over his destiny. The people in the opening are shown as literally having to deal with the trash left behind by the Avengers whilst Tony profits off it, and it makes the villain one of the most relatable characters in the entire MCU. We jump forward 8 years, but this messes with my OCD a bit, as Civil War takes place 4 years after Avengers, which happens in 2012. If this time jump was right, then that would mean that this movie takes place in 2020 instead of 2016. I kinda wish they would just replace this title card. Like, come on man, you added new scenes for Star Wars on Disney+, so someone couldn't just replace this one time. Anyway, never mind. We jump to Peter and see the trip to Berlin from his point of view in Civil War. Peter gets given a new suit and a briefcase, which could be a reference to Iron Man 2, in which Tony gets his new suit out of a case called the football. Peter jumps into the fight, and this scene lines up perfectly with a battle from Civil War. We also see the bruises that Tony receives in that film, namely his black eye, in the exact same place. Tony calls Happy forehead of security, which is a callback to the jibe he did to the character in Iron Man 3, and he rejects Peter's hug as he leans over. This hug would later come to get some closure on it, as when Tony and Peter reunite in Endgame, the first thing that the former does is hug him. We also see a hint of Peter's spider sense starting to develop, as just before Happy is about to hit a car, Peter looks back and forth nervously, and then Hap honks the horn before missing the collision. Flash forward 2 months, and we see Peter texting Happy, but he's getting blanked. Now, a cool little detail here is that Peter's phone has a crack on it, and throughout the movie it gets more and more damaged, eventually leaving the screen looking like a spider's web. Peter mentions quitting band practice in his message, and later in the film, when Tony asks what he's up to on the ferry, he says that he's at band practice. Tony says Happy told me you quit it 6 weeks ago, so it's just a nice little subtle callback to this message. Now what's interesting is that Happy pretty much ignores Peter throughout the movie. In thematic terms, Peter is very much a mirror of Toomes, who was too overlooked by the Stark Company and its employees. They finally pay attention when Peter kicks up enough noise, which is similar to the Vulture, who flies under the radar a lot of the time. I think Tony and Happy at the end of the movie do sort of regret not paying attention to Peter, and through the turn of the Vulture, they realise that if you don't keep your eyes on the little things, then it can blow up in your face. Spiders are of course little creatures that we often overlook, so even the name of the hero fits his name and how he's viewed. Vultures are also scavengers, and the Vulture is a scavenger in this film, so yeah, great job Marvel. At school, Peter walks past a mural of famous inventors from time, and we can actually see Howard Stark in the background, too, played by John Slattery. Bruce Banner also appears in a lineup of famous scientists at one point, and this world building really shows how much effort Marvel put into their movies. We also see the principal catching a drone in this scene and telling a student to go to his office. This is Kenneth Choi, who also played Jim Morita in Captain America: The First Avenger. We can actually see a photograph of Jim in his office at one point, showing that the two characters are actually related. Speaking of returning cast members, Peter's science teacher is also the same one that we see as a student in The Incredible Hulk. I love these moments as they really flesh out the MCU and show that characters often return in surprising and unexpected ways. Ned tells Peter that he's going to go to Peter's home that night so that the two can build the Lego Death Star, but Peter's distracted by Liz and he agrees to it without even thinking. Thus, he doesn't really know that Ned will be there on the night and accidentally reveals that he's Spider-Man to him. Cut to the classroom and the teacher is asking them how you calculate linear acceleration between 2 points. Flash gets the equation wrong and the teacher asks if Peter is still with them as he's sat watching videos of himself on his laptop. We see that the equation actually involves something that looks like a pendulum swing, and even though Peter hasn't been paying attention, he still works the answer out pretty quickly. This is because he's so used to swinging through the city and quickly working out angles that he has no problem handling the math behind it. We can see that the video he was watching was uploaded by Rocket Robinson 67, and this is a reference to Robbie Robertson, who debuted in 1967. We see how Peter makes his web fluid, and then cut to him and Ned looking over to Liz and Betty hanging up the homecoming sign. Though Peter stares at Liz, Ned actually stares at Betty, and this would pay off in Far From Home when the two end up dating. MJ interrupts this and we can see that she has a pile of books. Throughout this movie, you might notice she reads several, and these low-key hint at why she's interested in Spider-Man. One of the books is Of Human Bondage, which is about an orphan boy that ends up living with his auntie and uncle, and the other is Invitation to a Beheading. That is about a man that has been sentenced to hang, and he sits in his cell with only a spider to keep him company. Cut to the decathlon team and we see the group practicing questions. Flash sits there mocking Peter, but behind him we can see a number of school team signs. The team is clearly called the Tigers, and for a split second in the movie we even see the tiger mascot running through the halls. Pretty much every sign has "Go Get 'em Tigers" written on it, and "Go Get 'em Tiger" is a famous phrase that Mary Jane said to Peter in the comics. Flash also says that he has a date with Black Widow, and Peter heads to the deli to get a sandwich. He asks for it smushed down real flat, and we later see him eating it. Now, if there's one thing I know, it's sandwiches, and I think that he asks for it smushed down real flat to stop the ingredients falling out as he swings through the city. Peter webs his bag up, and we later find out that this got taken away when the bin got emptied. This is why Peter can later be seen carrying his books instead of having them in his bag. Now, if you slow down him putting on his web shooters, you can also see that he has a percentage sign on the right hand side showing how much fluid he has in the cartridge. Later, when he runs out of webbing, we get a warning and can see that it's on 0%. We also get a Stan Lee cameo, and then Peter stops an ATM robbery that's being carried out by people in Avengers masks. There's also a sign in the background that says, "Identity theft, we have you covered," which Peter stands in front of. Obviously these robbers are going under the identities of the Avengers, and hey, nice little nod to what's happening in this scene. Peter says to Thor that he thought he'd be more handsome in person, and later in Infinity War, when Star-Lord says he met the character, he makes sure everyone knows that he wasn't that good looking. Peter at this point gives him a funny look, and hey, I'm just saying, Chris Hemsworth is a good looking dude. Now, one of the cool little things that you might not have noticed is that Peter doesn't actually punch anyone in the entire movie. He has incredible strength, and hitting someone could probably leave their face looking like Deadpool, so instead he uses his webs to make everyone either hit the people around them or to throw them into things. Peter is attacked with the gravity gun and he grips the floor, but it rips up the paneling. However, when he gets slammed back into it, he grips the concrete underneath and thus doesn't get pulled up. Cut to Avengers Tower and we see Happy and Tony's robot arm Dummy. Dummy is often the butt of the joke, and sadly, here's no different. We actually learned in Iron Man that this was the first thing that Tony ever built, and it's good to see it making a return, even if everyone hates it. Don't worry though, Dummy, I still love you. Peter and May go to get Lob, and I love this scene. Thank you very much. We also see Spider-Man climbing out of a portaloo on the news, which is held up in a news article at the beginning of Far From Home. Aunt May says she's not a fan of Tony Stark and tells Peter that he should trust his instincts. This might actually set up his spider sense and how the character learns to embrace it throughout the movies. Cut to Ned asking Peter lots of questions, namely if he spits venom. This is of course a nod to one of Peter's biggest foes, who we learned last year is now going to be part of the MCU. Ned also says he would stand on a building and shoot his webs to see how far they would go, and this is a nod to Tobey Maguire doing the same thing in the Raimi trilogy. There's also another nod to the Raimi movies when Vulture attacks Peter with the glider. Peter jumps over it just like how he did when fighting the Green Goblin, but the Vulture was smart enough to stop it just before it hit him. Liz starts crushing on Spider-Man, and a friend asks if she would still love him even if he was seriously burnt. Liz said that she would love him for the person that he is inside. I think this might also be a little reference to Deadpool, who hopefully entering the MCU soon as well. They go to Liz's party after promising that Spider-Man will be there, and Liz starts talking to them, and then we get the sound of broken glass in the background and Liz goes to check on it.
Thanks. Oh, my parents will kill me if anything's broken. I gotta...
This later becomes another clue that Liz and Adrian are related, as when Toomes returns to Vulture HQ during the same night as the party, the Tinkerer says that his wife keeps texting him about a brake light. I'm guessing at the party that someone smashed one up, and this is what we heard earlier in the movie. That might be a reach though, but you know we love a good reach here. We then see the Shocker selling an Ultron arm to none other than Aaron Davis, played by Donald Glover. In comic books, this is actually Miles Morales' uncle, who we also saw in Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. In Into the Spider-Verse, Aaron's character at one point was watching Community on the TV, most notably the scene in which Donald Glover wears Spider-Man pajamas. So Aaron was watching the multiverse version of himself wearing Spider-Man pajamas, whilst also being that character, and it's crazy, and it's also one of the best Easter eggs that I've ever seen in a film. Aaron's alter ego is the Prowler, and we do see at one point that this is name dropped when Peter looks up his profile. Aaron initially turns down the Ultron gun, but becomes more interested when the Shocker pair talk about how they have climbers, something that the Prowler uses when committing crimes. A chase ensues and Peter runs through backyards in a scene that's a direct callback to Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which we see playing on a TV at a party. He's picked up by the Vulture, who ascends into the air and goes over the moon in what is a callback to Keaton doing the same thing with the Batwing in Batman 1989. Peter is rescued by Iron Man and he dries his suit by using a heater. Iron Man says that he put everything in his suit, and in addition to the heater, we know that there's a tracker and a parachute. Throughout our MCU videos, we've always talked about how Tony learns from his mistakes, and the heater is there after he landed in the cold wilderness of Iron Man 3. The tracker is there in case Peter gets kidnapped like how Tony did in the first Iron Man movie, and the parachute is there to stop what happened to Rhodey in Civil War potentially happening to the Webhead. We also see this parachute in Infinity War, and another cool little detail is that we can also see the suit moving, mimicking Tony. It waves its hand in an ocean to almost order something, and later when we cut to Tony in India, a drink is brought to him. Tony also drives an Audi R8 Spider in this movie, which nice little tie-in. At Vulture HQ we get a good look at the Shocker's arm, and this is actually the same as Crossbone's arms, so the group might have salvaged it from the character after he died. Peter tracks the Vulture's goons and realises that the Decathlon in Washington is close to where they're hiding out. He goes with the team across the country, and these school members actually show up on the bus in Infinity War, showing that Marvel reused the same cast to keep things consistent. On the road we see a sign for the Triskelion cleanup, which is a reference to Captain America the Winter Soldier. In that, Cap and Co crashed a helicarrier into the building in Washington, and thus the cleanup still continues. When practicing questions, Peter mentions the fake Marvel element vibranium, and then he and Ned work on the suit where they remove the training wheels protocol. This gives him access to Karen, who is voiced by Jennifer Connelly. Connelly is actually the real-life wife of Paul Bettany, who voiced Jarvis before going on to play the Vision. Peter gets instant kill mode, which is also a reference to Batman I think, and we can hear the criminals talking about the cleanup on the Triskelion, which again is a callback to the Winter Soldier. Peter fights the Vulture as he pulls off the heist and ends up getting trapped inside the damage control truck. If you slow the footage down, you can actually see one of the matter phasers rolling about the floor near his feet, and this is why the doorway closes above him. He goes to damage control deep storage and gets locked in there for what feels like an eternity, but was actually just 37 minutes. He actually finds an Ultron head at one point, and the eyes are still glowing red, so who knows, maybe the big bad bot of the MCU will be back one day. The scene at the Washington Monument happens, and we see Peter running there in a scene that's similar to how Sam and Cap did at the start of The Winter Soldier. Okay, that's a reach. I'll admit that's a reach. You got me. Peter saves the group in the elevator, and we cut to Adrian watching a report of the scene on the news. Clearly he knows his daughter is in Washington, so seems really worried by it, which could be seen as a clue that Liz is his daughter. From him we cut immediately to Liz's mum hugging Liz, hinting at the connection between the two. That is definitely a reach. Peter gets detention and then runs out and goes to his locker before lifting them all up. We can actually see scrapes on the wall above them, showing that he's done this several times. He goes to interrogate Aaron, who mentions his nephew, who, as we know from the comic books, is Miles Morales. Now there is a theory that Miles survived the snap and that he's going to be brought into the MCU roughly about the same age as Peter, if not older, but keep your eyes peeled on whether that's true or not. On the ferry, Peter comes across Matt Gorgon, and we can see that Karen flags up that he has a scorpion tattoo on his neck. Gorgon and Scorpion are one and the same, and I really hope that the little tease we got from Michael Mando on Instagram means he's gonna be in the third Spidey movie. When fighting the group, Spidey also does the exact same role that Cap did in Civil War, showing that the webhead learned it from him. I know we mentioned that in our Civil War video, but it's such a cool little detail, I couldn't miss it out of this breakdown. The ferry is torn apart, and Peter pulls it together in a move that's referenced in the opening of Into the Spider-Verse. The passengers are saved by Tony, and I have to say, I absolutely love this suit. I think it might be my favourite version, you know. I even spent $40 to get a Funko of it, and it was just basically the Civil War suit but repainted. Anyway, make sure you join my Patreon or whatever. Now, Peter gets his suit taken away, has time to build a Death Star from earlier, and he actually seems a lot happier. He even does a handshake with Ned that's the same one that Miles does during Into the Spider-Verse. He gets a date with Liz and goes to pick her up, which is when we discover that Toomes is the Vulture. Toomes also discovers that Peter is Spider-Man, and this lightbulb moment is subliminally hinted at as the traffic light turns to green when the penny drops. After being dropped off, Peter leaves the prom to stop him from robbing Stark. Happy discusses how they're loading the old Hulkbuster armor, something that would be replaced in Infinity War, and Cap's new shield, which we discover in Endgame Tony had made for the character even though they weren't really on speaking terms. Peter confronts Adrian and Toomes says he's sorry before he brings the building crashing down on his head. This moment's important because the sorry catches Peter off guard and almost leads to him being killed. Peter clearly learned from this, as in Far From Home, Mysterio says it to him before he tries to kill the character, but Peter manages to stop it. Toomes also takes out the structural joint, as we previously know he worked in construction, so he would know how to do this in order to bring the building down. Peter sees his reflection in the water with half the mask and his face, which is iconography that's followed the webhead throughout his rich history. He also lifts the rubble similar to how the character did in the comic The Final Chapter. Peter stops the Vulture from robbing the plane, and whenever I watch this, I always think that they might have ripped off the Batman scene in Rebirth when the Dark Knight had to stop one from crashing into Gotham. I don't know if that's for definite, but it always pops into my head, so I had to mention it when doing this breakdown. When Toomes is unpacking things, we can also see a case full of arc reactors, perhaps suggesting that Stark has built more suits since destroying them in Iron Man 3. Peter saves Vulture, and thus he decides to not rat him out to Scorpion, but Liz and her family are forced to move away, and Tony takes Peter upstate. They mention how Vision isn't big on doors, which is a nod to Civil War. Now, a weird detail that I've seen pointed out a fair bit is that Pepper wears the same t-shirt in bed in Iron Man 3 as Peter does in this film, and I do kind of wonder what's going on here. It's a very strange thing to put in your movie for a number of reasons. Anyway, never mind. Peter turns down the Iron Spider suit, but it of course pops back up in Infinity War. In order to make it so the press don't waste their time, Tony does a grand gesture and proposes to Pepper. Pepper is seen wearing this engagement ring in IW, and the movie closes out with Aunt May discovering that Peter is Spider-Man. This reveal of his identity is mirrored at the end of Far From Home when it's shown to the world and he says "what the F," just like how Aunt May does here. A post-credit scene then happens with the Vulture and Scorpion meeting in prison, potentially teasing the Sinister Six. Whew, and that's our list. Thank you for sticking around until the end. Sometimes your patience isn't rewarded, but I hope it was this time. Obviously, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the breakdown, and if we missed anything that should have made the list. Comment below and let us know, and make sure you check out our analysis of Into the Spider-Verse, which talks about all of the best Easter eggs in the movie. It's one of our greatest videos ever, so I definitely recommend that you check it out after this. If you want to support the channel from as little as 99 cents a month, then please click the join button below. We massively appreciate it, and as a thank you, you get access to content early. If you want to come chat to us after the show, either follow us at Heavy Spoilers or click the Discord link in the description below. Those are the best ways to keep up to date with the channel, so hopefully we see you over there very soon.